Psychologists of Reddit, have you ever been genuinely scared by a patient before? What's your story? Story 1, Parole Evaluation. I used to work as a clinical psychologist in a prison. One time, I had to do a parole evaluation for an inmate who was a big shot in a national gang. According to him, he was the top guy in the whole state. They actually put him in that specific prison to keep the gang in check and make sure things stayed under control. His record was long and violent, and honestly, I believed he was a true psychopath. Part of the evaluation was talking about his crime and figuring out if he felt any guilt. He spoke about torturing a man and leaving him to die because of some unpaid debt, and he said it like he was reading from a manual. He called it, live by the sword, die by the sword, like it was just a normal part of life. He also talked casually about how he still handled his business, even behind bars. I did not doubt it for a second. Out of the last 15 years, he had only spent about 18 months outside of prison. I recommended that he not be granted parole. I backed that up with several reasons in my report, and in the end, the parole board followed what I said. But what really shook me, since it was my first time doing a parole evaluation, was how much power this man had outside those prison walls. He could have easily sent someone to my house if he wanted to. I truly believe that. Some of the older psychologists told me not to let it get to me, that he would not take it personally because he understood how the system worked. Still, I was not so sure. A few months later, I was leading a therapy group for long-term offenders, and he was one of the guys in it. After the first session, I pulled him aside and asked if we were okay. He just smiled and told me not to worry. He said I was just doing my job and that he did not blame me for the report, since everything I wrote was true. After that, he actually became one of the most active and thoughtful members in the group. Small Diamond Story 2, Work Release Surprise. I work at a work release facility, which is kind of like a halfway point for inmates who are close to finishing their sentences. If they have been behaving well, they can apply to move to our center. Here, they get to work normal jobs during the day but still have to stay locked up at night, depending on their schedule. Out of our 128 inmates, some have been in prison for more than 10 years and were locked up for violent crimes. I had only been at this unit for a little over 4 months when this incident happened. One of the inmates, he was in a gang, though I never looked into what his exact crime was, since I usually avoid using the system to check their pasts, made a weird joke. He told me he knew where I lived. I joked back, saying something like, yeah, sure man. Now are you going to sign for your food or what? Doesn't bother me. Right away, he said my actual home address out loud and laughed. Then he told me not to worry, he was just messing around and did it for fun. Thing is, this guy had no real power or status, and he had a lot to lose. Still, in just a few weeks, he managed to figure out where I live, just from what was on my name tag. And that kind of information could be used to hurt someone. I do not live by myself either, so that made it worse. And he did all that just to play a joke on me. Story 3, Therapist and the Machete. I am training to become a therapist, and one of my tutors is a specialist in childhood trauma and abuse. She has told us some truly terrifying stories, but one really stuck with me. It was about a man in his 40s who had spent most of his life convinced that his parents were spying on him. He thought they were sending people to gather secrets so they could blackmail him later. This guy was seriously paranoid. He had to start therapy because of a petty theft charge. He believed his parents were tracking how he spent his money. After 6 weeks in therapy, he started to talk about making plans for his future. He did not go into much detail, but he said he had figured out a way to finally break free from his past. My tutor was unsure, but it seemed like he was making progress. Then 1 week later, he showed up again. This time he looked nervous and was carrying a big sports bag. My tutor tried to keep things friendly and said she liked his new bag. That is when he lost it. He broke down crying and told her he had a machete inside the bag. His plan was to kill everyone who had been part of his old life, starting with her. He believed that would set him free, but he said she was too kind, and it would be really hard to hurt her. My tutor calmly stepped out of the room and called the police. The man did not fight it. He had pretty much given up by that point. The police confirmed he did have a large machete in his bag, and his car was full of garbage bags. She told us that was the only time she really thought she might die. She always ends that story by saying, be kind to every client, because you never know which one is planning to kill you. Story 5, the one time I felt in danger. I work as a therapist, not a psychologist, just to be clear. I used to be at a residential facility for kids and teens who had really tough behavior problems. Most days, even when one of them was getting aggressive or upset, I could calm them down. I did not usually feel like I was in danger. Honestly, my biggest worry was usually making sure they did not hurt themselves when things got heated. But there was one time that stuck with me. I had a client who was physically strong and had a tendency to explode without warning. One day, this kid was acting in a way that could have seriously hurt someone else. I think there was a plan to attack another resident, if I remember right. Because of that, I had to put them on restriction, meaning they had to stay within sight of staff at all times. The reaction I got was instant. The kid ran straight at me and tried to choke me. It all happened fast. Thankfully, other staff members were close by and jumped in before I got seriously hurt. That was not the only time, either. On a different day, that same kid managed to take apart the curtain rod from their bedroom window and tried to hit me with it. They swung it right at my head. I was just lucky enough to duck in time. The strange thing is, outside of those moments, I actually had a pretty good connection with this kid. We got along well most of the time, like 99% of our interactions were solid. I enjoyed working with him, believe it or not. But that 1%, that part reminded me just how unpredictable things could get. Story 6, Hunted by Sound. My brother-in-law is blind and has low-functioning autism. He is a really special person, and I have had some incredible moments with him over the years. But there was one incident that still gives me chills. His longtime care provider had been working with him since he was little. She knew how to handle his outbursts and had gotten pretty skilled at helping him through rough patches. Over time, with the right medication, he had become much more stable, and she had started to let her guard down a bit. But by then, he was no longer a small child. He was 20 years old and stood 6 feet tall. In just a flash, something in him snapped. 1 second he was sitting on the couch across from her, and the next, he lunged. She was sitting in a chair directly in front of him, and he attacked her without warning. He was strong. Not just strong, powerful and wild with rage. I am a big guy myself, 6 feet 4 inches tall and 225 pounds, and I have been in tough situations with him before. But this was different. He was full of fury. He hit her again and again with his fists. He bit her arms and hands, yanked her hair. Somehow, through sheer instinct, she managed to push herself away on the floor and scramble behind the couch. Then, thinking quickly, she slid the couch into a corner so there was no easy way for him to get around it. She crouched down behind it, held her breath, and stayed as quiet as she could. For over an hour, he searched for her. He walked back and forth along the front and side of the couch, running his hands across it, listening for any sound. He was hunting by sound. She stayed perfectly still. Finally, he gave up. He wandered to the other side of the room and started playing with some toys like nothing had happened. She took that chance, ran for the door, and just then, her assistant showed up to check on her, since her scheduled time had already gone over. I still think about what she went through that day. My brother-in-law is an incredible guy, and I really care about him. But the thought of someone tracking you by sound, searching like that is something I will never forget. The worst night of my life. I am not a psychologist or anything like that, but I went through something with my ex that rattled me to the core. He had just started a new prescription, and for whatever reason, his body reacted horribly to it. Things went downhill fast. He started seeing things, full-blown hallucinations, and sometimes he would black out completely. I mean, he would do things and not remember any of it afterward. He would call me screaming in the middle of the night, completely panicked, and the next day he would have no clue it even happened. Now, he had experienced hallucinations before, but this medication made them much worse. And much more dangerous. There is one night I will never forget. He was having one of his episodes while we were on the phone. It was around 3 in the morning when he suddenly said, "I boiled some water." I asked him why, because, come on, it is 3 in the morning. And he answered, in this weird calm voice, "They told me I have to stick my hand in here." My stomach dropped. I was terrified. I begged him to please go to the hospital as soon as the sun came up and ask them to change his medication. He was not happy about it, but eventually, he agreed. That morning, he went in. While he was there, things got even worse. He started vomiting blood. The hospital staff had to pump his stomach. Turns out, during one of his blackouts, he had swallowed the entire bottle of pills. Story 8, the one that got under her skin. A close friend of mine is married to a woman who works as a psychologist in a high-security prison. She deals with some of the most dangerous and disturbed people out there. Think Hannibal Lecter level twisted. Funny enough, it was actually the Silence of the Lambs movie that inspired her to choose this path, and honestly, she reminds me a lot of Clarice Starling. She is tough, no nonsense, and sharp as a blade. Before she is assigned to a case, she is usually given everything she needs to know, legal documents, court testimony, even recordings of crimes when necessary. She has listened to murder tapes and heard things most of us could not stomach. But she handles it. She is good at what she does, and she seems to thrive on trying to get inside the minds of dangerous people. But there was one case that shook her badly. She could not share many details, but from what she said, the man was either a serial rapist or a serial killer. Whatever the case, he had a very clear type of victim, and she matched it, down to the last detail. As soon as their session started, he began acting strange toward her. Not hostile, just familiar. Too familiar. He started asking her personal questions, trying to strike up casual conversation. He wrote her notes. He drew pictures for her. He even tried to offer her little gifts. They were small gestures, but it was chilling because these were all the same kinds of things he had done to his victims before he hurt them. Obviously, he could not act on it while behind bars, but what he was doing was enough to set off every alarm. She was rattled. And this is a woman who does not get rattled. She told me she started feeling anxious at the grocery store, constantly looking over her shoulder. At night, even in her own home, she felt uneasy. And the guy was locked up in a maximum security prison. Still, she felt like prey. Like she was being stalked, even though it made no logical sense. Eventually, the prison pulled her off the case. She was assigned counseling afterward. When she talked to me about it, she did not get dramatic or emotional. She explained it matter of fact, like it was part of the risk that comes with the job. But I could tell this one hit different. This one got under her skin in a way the others never had. And just to be clear, any kind of letter, gift, or token from an inmate crosses a serious line. She always turned them down flat, no hesitation. In fact, some of the things he tried to give her were intercepted before he ever got the chance to deliver them. It has been nearly 10 years since she told me this story. But I remember every part of it. That cold feeling in her voice. That look in her eyes. I will never forget it. Story 9. The client who kept me looking over my shoulder. I used to work as a drug and alcohol counselor. I was not a psychologist, just someone trying to help people stay clean and get their lives back on track. There was one client I had for a while who always gave me an uneasy feeling. I could never quite connect with him, and our sessions never went anywhere meaningful. There was just something about him that felt off. I cannot explain it better than that. Sometimes I would see him outside of work, usually at a bar in town, which, by the way, he was absolutely not supposed to be at. He had been sent to me by the court, and part of his treatment plan was to stay away from alcohol and any places where it was served. Seeing him at that bar made me realize that he now knew at least one place where I went in my free time. That fact sat heavy with me. In our sessions, he would talk about his weekends out of town. Nothing too specific. He always kept the details vague. But the stories he told, if you paid attention, sounded a lot like assaults. He would say things like, she acted like she did not like me, but really she was just playing around. Flirting. Anyway, I found a way to take control, so she wanted me. And then he would laugh in this gross, smug way. He never gave me a name. Never told me exactly where he had been. And he said just enough to sound threatening, but not enough that I could take any sort of action. There was no real information to report, nothing concrete I could pass along. But the way he talked made my skin crawl. Eventually, he told me he was moving out of the area. At his final session with me, he looked me right in the eyes and said something like, maybe we could throw down. I might as well get my money's worth before I go. It was a threat, soft but clear. I said nothing, just ended the session and made sure he walked out. After that, I kept looking over my shoulder every time I was out, checking my surroundings, waiting to make sure he was really gone. Story 10. The kid who asked about killing a pregnant teacher. I used to work as an aide in a middle school special education classroom. I am not a psychologist or therapist, just someone who wanted to help support the kids who needed a little extra. But that first year on the job threw me into some really dark situations, and there are a couple of students I will never forget. Most of my time was spent with 8th grade boys. 2 of them in particular had major behavioral issues, way beyond anything I had expected going in. One of the boys actually assaulted a girl, and he did it right there at school, in front of a bunch of students. The police got involved, and he was arrested for it. But the school could not expel him. Because of his disability, they said. So instead, for the rest of the school year, he was not allowed to be anywhere near that girl, not in the hallways, not at lunch, nowhere. I spent most of my day shadowing him, just trying to keep things from getting worse. But he did not care about school, not even a little. He refused to do work, sat in the resource room all day, and barely spoke unless he had to. Last I heard, he got arrested again, this time for breaking into someone's house and stealing a gun. But the kid who really scared me, the one who got under my skin, was different. He was completely antisocial, barely talked, unless it was to say something disturbing. He would make threats about hurting himself or other people whenever something like a field trip or assembly was coming up. Eventually, we had to tell his parents ahead of time just so they would keep him home on those days. What really freaked me out was the way he talked about death. Constantly. And the way he did it made it even worse. He was heavily medicated, so everything he said came out slow and quiet, almost like he was whispering to no one. His mouth would hang open, and sometimes there would be spit sliding down his chin while he spoke. One of the teachers in the building was pregnant, not even his teacher, but he knew who she was. One day, out of nowhere, he looked at me and asked, would her baby survive if someone ran her over with a car? I froze. I tried to change the subject, told him I had no idea. But he kept going. What if someone cut her stomach open? What if they stabbed her? What if she had already been dead for a while and nobody found her? At that point, I reported it. I told the special education teacher everything. And her reaction? She looked exhausted. She said he had asked her the same stuff before. Other kids, too. He had scared them. And the pregnant teacher? She had been told to stay away from him, just in case he said or did something to upset her. I have worked with a lot of kids, and I try to believe there is hope for all of them. But with that one, I still think about those questions and how calmly he asked them. Like he was already picturing the answers. Story 11, the parolee who gave me the creeps. I am not a psychologist, but my first job was working with parolees. There was one man I met who still gives me chills every time I think about him. He came in right after a court appearance, and sometimes we did not get his full criminal record before meeting him. This was one of those times. I called him into my office and began going over the rules and restrictions he had to follow while on parole. I explained how often he needed to report, what he could and could not do. During the meeting, he requested a male officer instead of me. He said he hated women and got along better with men because men understood him. At this point, I still did not know why he was on parole, and he refused to talk about it. He spent about half an hour telling me he was the real victim. According to him, women were always out to get him. He was hostile and gave me disgusted looks the entire time. He sat with his arms crossed and did not seem to want to cooperate. About an hour into our meeting, the paperwork finally arrived. It showed that he had committed some very serious and disturbing crimes against women. I told him I had the documents and asked him to explain his side of the story. Suddenly, it was like a switch flipped. He became almost cheerful, proud even, about what he had done. He stood up and acted out what happened, giving detailed descriptions with a smile on his face. He asked me what I thought about it all. Without going into the details here, his story was graphic and hard to listen to. What chilled me most was how proud he seemed. Throughout the meeting, he kept asking if I thought he was the victim. At one point, he even asked if I knew where he could get compensation as a victim. Near the end, he tried to charm me. He kept asking what time I finished work and if I parked nearby. I left that day with a group of colleagues. He went back to jail about a month later. While I believe in giving people a chance to change, I truly hope he stays locked up. Story 12, my 2 years working with troubled teens. I am a psychologist now, but before grad school, I spent about 2 years working at a place for male teenage sex offenders. It was one of the hardest times in my life. When I first started, I believed in the staff and really wanted to help these kids. But it did not take long, maybe 6 weeks or so, before the stress got to me. The kids quickly figured out that most of the rules were more like suggestions. They could curse at us, threaten us, steal things, break rules, and manipulate the system with almost no real consequences. I remember on my second day, I saw a kid smash a steel door using a chair. They would pick fights with staff and even with each other just to force us to step in, hoping to get someone hurt. I am a pretty straightforward, rule-following guy, and once the kids realized I was strict about rules, they started to hate me and make me their target. I began having chest pains on the way to work. I could not sleep at night because I kept thinking about the threats I might face or the restraints I might have to use the next day. It messes with your mind when people can insult you, lie about you to get you in trouble, threaten you for months, and you can't defend yourself because you are bound by your job. You cannot hit them back or talk back or show any attitude. The only punishments you can give, like taking away privileges, mean nothing to these kids. And still, you give them everything. Help with hygiene, schoolwork, counseling, playing games, talking through their problems, and putting them to bed. You basically become their parent. And yes, I was afraid of some of them. I was assaulted 3 times while I worked there. 2 times were minor, a punch to the chest or the face. But once, a kid hit me 6 or 7 times in the head. One kid was HIV positive, and when he got angry or in trouble, he would try to make us feel guilty by saying he was going to die from AIDS. Then, he would threaten to cut himself and get his blood on us. We also had a lot of gang members, and they were all very unpredictable and dangerous. Those 2 years changed me. It was the toughest work I ever did. Story 13, the wildest 6-year-old I ever worked with. I work on a farm, and the grandson of the man I worked for was absolutely off the charts crazy. His grandparents couldn't control him at all. They even bought him a .22 rifle. It had a trigger lock, and they gave him the key and some bullets. But I didn't feel safe with that, so I locked it away because the kid was just 6 years old. He threatened to shoot me, so I put him in timeout. Instead of calming down, he took a crap on the floor and laughed like a complete maniac. Later, I found out it wasn't even his rifle I took, it was his sister's. But that didn't stop him. A few hours after I locked the gun up, he came outside with the trigger lock removed, the bolt in, and bullets in his pocket. He said he was going to kill me for taking his sister's gun. Every day was something crazy like that. I saw other workers chasing this kid with hammers because he was just wild. I have a whole bunch of stories from that year. One time, I told him to stop playing on the roof of a tractor because he could get hurt, and I wasn't going to babysit him. When he got down, he kind of flopped like he meant to fall, landing stomach first on the back of the tractor. It had to hurt bad. He cried for about 20 seconds, then started laughing like a maniac. I later saw huge bruises on his stomach when he lifted his shirt to check for cuts. He probably broke some ribs. I watched him kill baby chickens. First, he'd say how cute they were and pet them, then stomp on them. He tortured the farm dogs so badly that the dogs started growling whenever the kid came near. One time, I had to stop the dog from attacking him. The dog had him by the back of the neck and was biting down hard. The kid was crying, but then he suddenly started laughing again. I can't even explain how much frustration that kid caused. He scared me, and I work around aggressive Black Angus bulls every day. Everyone hated him, and I'm so glad I'm not around him anymore. Psychologists, he's coming your way. The college kid who needed help. I'm not a psychologist, but my brother is, and he told me a story that really stuck with him. I won't share this guy's name for obvious reasons. My brother started his private practice at home, in the same city where I went to college. He worked with a guy who was actually in my class. We were both economics majors. I saw this guy all the time, he seemed pretty normal. Always wearing t-shirts and jeans, headphones in, quiet. The only odd thing was he always carried a laptop bag or briefcase along with his backpack. He began seeing my brother about 2 months into freshman year. The guy came in for depression. At first, it was all pretty basic stuff. Feeling like he didn't fit in, trouble talking to people. But my brother said something felt off. It seemed like the guy was reciting rehearsed lines. After a few sessions, things changed. The guy started saying he was seeing things. He couldn't stand being alone in dark rooms. His roommate moved out, which made things worse. He said he saw movement out of the corner of his eye when it was dark, small, almost unnoticeable motions. He told my brother he was scared all the time at night. That worried my brother because now it wasn't just depression. Paranoia is a bad sign. He began thinking this guy was showing signs of schizophrenia. The movements got worse. Around late November, the guy started calling my brother's work phone late at night, like clockwork at 2 a.m. My brother answered the first few calls because he was worried the guy was getting worse. The calls were awful. The guy's voice was weak, whispering, and you could hear him crying. This went on for days. Eventually, at the next appointment, my brother told him he needed to take a break from school, consider inpatient care, and focus on getting better. He referred him to a specialized health center and a psychologist who handled serious cases. The guy broke down crying in the office. He apologized for over an hour and kept saying, "I'm so scared." I never saw this guy after the holiday break. My brother had a few more meetings with him, and he agreed to inpatient treatment after talking with his parents. Then, about 4 months later in April, my brother started noticing strange things outside his window, flashes of light that didn't look like car headlights. He thought maybe drunk college kids were messing around. One night, he heard hard knocking on his door but ignored it. That same night, he got a call and, having changed his policy for late night calls, didn't answer. It was the guy, screaming into the phone, "They're back, they're back, they're back." He repeated it faster and faster, crying on the message, begging, "I'm outside. Please let me in, please." Before the message ended, you could hear him pounding on my brother's front door. After that, the guy stopped talking to my brother. 3 months later, we found out he had committed suicide.